Hello, this is Blair Stanislao with the Happy Lion Center. Welcome to our podcast, Mystical and Infamous, where we have playful and easy conversations about anything mystical, getting to the heart of all things strange and weird. Join us in a bit of magical tomfoolery, spreading the alchemy of love and light. And now, we invite you to enjoy the show.
Okay, well, I'm really excited to kind of explore that because I did work in a public school system in Florida. My mother was a teacher for 41 years, so I am very familiar with how it works. And it's interesting looking at the dynamic of how children, I don't want to say the word that they usually say. Because usually the school systems are all about performance, right? It's how do you perform when you're at school, right? But they're little human beings. They don't need to perform all the time, right? They just exist sometimes, and that's okay. But that is kind of the way school systems are usually set up. And I have noticed, like we actually, this morning, I have a group that meets and we do meditation and so forth. And I don't remember why we were talking about this, but somebody had heard something about ADHD. And we oftentimes are talking about, for example, if there's some phrases that go around that say about protecting your energy. Then, oftentimes the very intellectual ones are like, what do I need to protect from? And so we kind of clarify that it's not really protection. It's more of you're getting in alignment with your true energy. And so you strengthen that energy. And when you strengthen that, those that are not aligned with essentially what you're radiating, which is pure positive energy, right? Essentially, they kind of fall away. So it's kind of how we manage, somebody's coming into my space that is causing me conflict, right? They're giving you triggers or what have you. And if you get yourself aligned, usually that conflict either resolves or that person just kind of magically, for whatever reason, kind of winds up not being in your space. And so somebody was mentioning that they're doing some research with ADHD and the frequencies. You can actually play music that will help those kids. And one of our group members was saying something about autism. And I reminded them that one of the things is we have to make sure that we see each other as whole and complete and healed, right? So the parents would benefit from knowing, not that they don't know that, but sometimes they have to get reminded because society tells them over and over, oh, your child is autistic and these are the problems we're having and so forth. But just to go back to that space where you remember that they are perfect the way they are, and then being able to approach, okay, how do we make adjustments so that you have a better interaction with other people? But it is very easy to get in. We could just add this part in, like the more aligned adults we have, it's going to become much more natural. So
what I love about that is that also the more aligned adults we have, that means that they are also healing and going back to their inner child, to the child that they're still have within them as they're interacting with their children.
Yes.
So that's the other piece as well. So a lot of people are like, oh, it's too late for me. It's like, no, it's not, because what you're choosing now can be unraveling and undoing and healing those wounds. And then also empowering you now to move forward and whoever else is in your family and your circle.
Yeah. And I think that's a real concrete example of what they mean when they say, and healing yourself heals your lineage backwards and forwards. Because of course it can be dynamic. Yeah. What do you?
And I can resonate with you because I have both my parents were bilingual educators. So being raised by educators is a very different childhood.
It is. It's fun. I mean, I'm kind of addicted to learning. I love it. And I was just thinking how sometimes when you have a teacher that, a lot of times the student doesn't always get why, like most of the time, the student doesn't always understand why am I being asked to do these things. So we could put that in the context of a classroom. We could put it in the context of the parent child. You could put it in the context of life and you, right? It doesn't matter. If you don't understand that that things are coming from a loving standpoint, and that the reason you're being put in that environment is so that you can learn and grow and get better. A lot of times there's a lot of like resistance and sometimes turns into conflict. Whereas if we come to it again, we're looking at ourselves even as being healed, right? If we see ourselves, our higher self is putting ourselves in these positions where we can have these struggles so that we can then grow from it. If we see it from a place of love, then there's so much, life is easier. So what do you do for your families when you talk to them? Like, what do you find are common problems, and what are this kind of suggestions that you give to them?
Well, we were talking about, and I love that you said this. There's a book that I love recommending to people. It's called Would You Teach a Fish to Climb a Tree? It's called A Different Perspective on Autism, ADHD, ADD, and OCD. And in there's a chapter saying, like, what if your child is perfect? But the other aspect of it as well is recognizing you're perfect too. Like, you're not in the wrong. And I think that one of the places I always start with my families is acknowledging what they've done right, acknowledging what they know. What do I know about this? Where am I an expert in myself, in my child, in my family? And starting there, because a lot of people, like you mentioned earlier, which I totally see every day, every week, all year long, they'll fixate on what's missing, what's difficult, what's a challenge, where they're lacking. And then the parents also then start buying that and glopping them on to their own mindset and reality. And so it's harder for them to see themselves, including all the things that they know, and their child, and all the things that are possible with their child. So I think that's a really good first place to start. I love asking, what are everyone's strengths? Like, no one really has those conversations anymore. They're so go, overscheduled, adrenaline overload. And so I like inviting my families to sit with either themselves, with their partners, if there's a partner, with their children, if the kids have the language skills to do that. But even when they don't, I like having them around and then just them marinating in those energies of like acknowledgement, and be like, what's great about us? What's a gift about us? And sometimes for the kids, they'll draw it. The little ones, they'll draw a picture of what it is. For the other ones, they might draw and do little words. And for some of them, they might journal or they might write it out. But this whole like, hey, makes me a joy to be around? What lights me up? What brings me enthusiasm and excitement about my life? And it just totally shifts your vibration about things. And it's a definite different place to start from and create from than you're messing up on this, you're slow on that, you're delayed on this. And I find that a lot of my parents had those same struggles themselves when they were in school, or they were socializing with their peers. And so when they're seeing their child, it brings up all that stuff. And that's another thing that might make it more challenging for them to see the situation clearly, because they're like, I don't want them to deal with what I went through, or they're like projecting all this stuff from the past into the present, which totally limits the future. And I'm like, wait a minute, let's be right here. Is that actually relevant and true right now? Is that applicable to your child or to this other child? Because there's often multiple kids who have different needs. And they're like, wait a minute, you're right. It's just, it makes me think of this and this and you're like, breathe.
That's their trigger, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also for them to recognize that, and then the words and the thoughts that are affecting how they perceive the situation. So I really love starting with acknowledgement and that awareness, and really being like, you're not wrong, and neither is your child. Now what can we create together?
That's a beautiful way to start. I think that's almost, I honestly can't even imagine, because even just doing this energy work, that's one of the things that, regardless out of the school system or not, it doesn't matter. As humans, if we're focusing on that negative stuff, that's what we wind up bringing into our lives. Right. I'll just share with you, my daughter, I did some neurofeedback to try and my husband died. They gave me some sleeping pills. I don't know if I got addicted to them, but it was difficult for me to sleep without them. Right. So trying to get off of those things, I did some neurofeedback, which was wonderful, which essentially taught me to get into a state of meditation. That's really what I did. Okay. They didn't use any of those words, but that's what it was. So my daughter had trouble sleeping. And so I was like, okay, you're going to try this. It's not pills. We're going to do this. She goes down there, and immediately when he looked at her report, he kind of whispered to me because I was in the room and said, she's got ADD. And I knew what that means because I've been a teacher. I've seen those kids. Okay. And I thought, oh no, we're not doing that. I'm not going to label her. I'm not going to even tell her because you already know your child. By the time they get to that point, you already know what they're like. Right. And so I actually never even told her, and she didn't even figure it out until she was late middle school. And of course, she asked me why, and I said, "Well, I didn't want to have you be labeled. Yes, you have an active mind, and yes, you exhibit some of these characteristics, but that doesn't mean that that's the only way you can exist." And I didn't want exactly what you're talking about. Whereas, oftentimes, educators not meaning to cause this to happen. That's kind of the way that we're taught to do things. But a true teacher knows that that's not really the best way to go, just because they kind of intuitively know what we're talking about here.
But one of the things that I wish was the case was that people would have the labels for access to resources that they need or supports, or for people to do differentiated instruction without the stigma. I think that most people, they'd be fine with the labels and the diagnoses if it didn't come with a lot of stigma. I actually did a call. I'm sure you would have appreciated this if we had known each other at the time. It was actually asked of me by some friends and colleagues in India, because the stigmatization and marginalization of those who have special abilities there is very strong. There's not really a lot of discussions around how to support them, how to teach them differently. They're just kind of hidden. They're just shoved to the side a lot. And this one woman asked me to do a class, a workshop online. And we decided to call it, "Have You Been Told the World Would Be a Better Place Without People with Special Needs?" And all these people came from all over the world that chimed in with their experiences, and how sharing really how either they had been explicitly or implicitly told that, yes, either they themselves who had special abilities or their siblings or their parents would be the world would be better without them in it. And that resonated with me, because my siblings, that's how I came into this work. My sister has spina bifida, and she also had stuttering when she was growing up, very severe stuttering. And my brother is hard of hearing. Both of them were in and out of the hospitals with surgeries and therapies. My brother had a heart murmur and a diaphragmatic hernia. So it was just like an ongoing thing ever since I was a little kid. And even the very people that were there to treat them, to do these interventions, to do the surgeries, not all of them, but many of them, surprisingly so, were really suggesting and focusing on what they weren't going to be able to do. Oh, they're going to live with you. They would tell my mom and my dad, they're going to live with you for the rest of your life. They're not going to be able to walk. My sister learned to walk at 4. They're not going to be able to go to college. Both of them went to college. They're not going to be able, all these things that they do. And one of the things that is my mission is to have parents be so clear and empowered that they know what's really true, and keep opening those doors to possibilities beyond what's projected and expected of them, of their child, or of their family. Because man, did we have to navigate and swim through a lot of crap when we were growing up because of that. And so I think that that's another big obstacle that I think I see a lot, is families knowing more is possible, but the people that maybe they're interacting with from their own family, like extended family, to the teachers, to the doctors, are not seeing their kids in totality. And that's rough.
It is. It's really rough. And it's even rougher, I think, when you've got it coming from multiple angles. And I would imagine that there's some point at which when you are able to sit down with your clients and you're causing them to have a conversation about what's beautiful about the person, right? Just taking the time to spend that. I mean, that's gratitude, right? I am grateful for this person being this way, or myself being that way.
And what I love about gratitude is that judgment and gratitude cannot coexist in the same place. So here's the thing that it blows me away, is that it's not a small thing to really look at, you're not wrong, and really having these parents and caregivers and even educators. I work with a lot of educators. They're like, I know more is possible with the kids that I'm working with, and I want some additional tools on how to support them and how to be a better liaison and advocate with the parents and all these different things. But some people, when they start with just that, like, that movie, Good Will Hunting, where there's that big scene with Matt Damon and Robin Williams, and Robin Williams over and over again says, "It's not your fault." And at first he's like, sure, I know that. Sure. And he like deflects it. And then he finally really hears it and receives it. And he starts crying. It unlocks something within us when we start to acknowledge where we've been judging ourselves and start to dissipate it and get it out of our bodies. And I've had multiple parents cry, being like, you're the only person that I feel is really, when they say that, it's really true, or that I can actually start to believe it a little bit more. And it's not just words and then nothing. Then we're going to take that and we're going to create a plan. We're going to take some action steps. We're going to look at the home. We're going to look at these different ways in which each person learns and communicates and connects, and then go from there. But just starting that and being like, oh my God, because I'll validate, like, oh yeah, so this and this and this, and then you're probably doing this, but they told me not to. And I was like, yeah, you knew what you were doing. And they were like, I did know.
Yeah. Actually, I don't remember where I was just having this conversation. I think it was yesterday in a class. And we were acknowledging the beauty of where we are technologically. And somebody was saying, essentially, isn't it amazing that we've never had this platform in the world as of yet where we can connect with people and hear their authentic stories? Like, we can genuinely connect. We're having these conversations, right? We can genuinely connect with people all over the world. They feel empowered enough to actually share the truth of who they are. And we can hear that and understand and connect together. And I do want to chime in here just because I love astrology, and it just happens to be an avenue, right? But, and I do hypnosis too. And that's one of the things too. What I see is the person, once they're seen, so that's kind of what you're talking about with that movie. He was being seen by Robin Williams' character, right? And he was saying, I see you, I see you, I see you. Do you see me seeing you, right?
And so do you see yourself? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just that acknowledgement that just honestly, it just kind of like chips off the outside ice. And then you can go into those feelings. And once you get there, then that's when you have real healing. And it does a really good job at sticking, because I see that once somebody has experienced that with another person, not only do they kind of shift the way they're looking at themselves, they stop telling themselves the stories that they hear from everybody else. And they start going back to their heart and acknowledging they know who they are. And so that means that every conversation in their head and every conversation with other people, they always know I am okay the way I am.
It's not a small thing. And I love that image, Blair, of the ice, because it's so congruent with so much of what I see. Like, think about the last obstacle you overcame. And before you even acknowledged that it was something you wanted to address, before you really were like, I got this and I can do it, before you created a plan and took some steps to move out of it, a lot of us feel stuck, but stuck in a way that feels like we're frozen, like encased in ice. And for each of us, it's something different that's going to get us out of the ice. Maybe for you, I love that you said chipping away at the ice. For some people, they need to be fire. They need to like be a blaze and actually not let themselves like limit their passions and limit their desires and what they know and their power, and just like light up and melt it like from inside out. Yeah. And then other people, it might be that they need somebody else to come in. It's not them chipping it away. It might be somebody else, or a combination of them with somebody else doing those different ways of getting out of this ice. But the key thing is what's going to get you unstuck and what's going to get your child unstuck. And one of the things that I think is really important for this is to also acknowledge how much your kids are picking up on what's around them. Yeah. And that they're watching you more than what they say. So a lot of my parents want to talk the talk, but they're not walking the walk, They'll say all these different things. And then the kid is like, but you're not doing it. Or you're saying this, but you're not, wait, this doesn't match up. And it's confusing. Or you'll see them have behaviors that will alert you to how they know the hypocrisy that is showing up right here. And they're trying to point it out to you with their behavior. So one of the other things that we look at is, hey, what's your child's behavior telling you? And let's look at how we can move these undesired behaviors to more desired behaviors. Not that they're bad, not that they're wrong. It's information, it's communication. And so how could I have different worksheets that I give my parents, and we walk through it together so they have that to take home and they can have it to refer to together, especially if there's more than one parent involved. I had a particularly interesting case where there was 3 households that I was coordinating through my coaching program, where it was the grandparents of the dad, the parents of the dad, the grandparents. Then there was dad with his new wife and new kids. And then there was the mom with her new husband. And this one kid, again, another example of a kiddo with ADHD, was hopping around these 3 different households. Very different parenting styles, very different priorities, very different gifts for each of the parents, and just strategies, the layout of the house, everything we had to look at. And also work on how they were communicating between each other. Wow, how much progress did we do? But part of what we needed to do with that was looking at, she is telling you something with her behavior. What do you know? Okay, now what do you know? And how do you know? Because sometimes it's different pieces of a puzzle or different angles of it. And when they started to actually acknowledge that and say, oh, you're getting this piece. Oh, maybe I can actually hear and see you, and acknowledge that's valid and a valid way to receive that information. And then also not making her wrong or any of the other parents wrong, because there's a lot of finger pointing between these households, as you can imagine. And as soon as the finger pointing stopped and they looked at what they had control over and what would work within their households, it was a total change. Like, it was so amazing. She's doing really, really well. And that was another case where, I remember you saying about your daughter that you didn't want her to get the label of ADHD. For her, she actually embraced it. She really wanted to know. She's like, I already know I'm thinking differently. I don't know what's going on. And so for her, it was this framework to understand herself. And then they didn't actually talk to the school about it. It was really for the kiddo.
Oh, beautiful.
So it was for her to know, hey, you're different, but not less than.
Right.
And this is what you need to learn. And then what else do you know? So it was part of the conversation with her of, okay, what else do you know? Do you want to have background noise while we're doing homework? Do you need to have a certain seat? And she would ask and advocate for her needs better, knowing that it was okay for her to ask for something different than her other siblings, than her parents, and then her peers.
Yeah. I always found that really, it's always a strange dynamic, but I always found that really interesting how the education system, whether it be a school or where you're going to get your degree and what they teach you or what have you, they all have different approaches to how do you make the accommodations, right? But at a minimum, I would say pretty much all people who go into education, who go into teaching, realize that there is a need for that. And of course, then there's that balance. And unfortunately, in our society, we're highly litigious and there's a lot of finger pointing, right? But if you're coming from a place of love, I think that was the most frustrating it still is the most frustrating when I hear about people who have they're labeled as ADD or ADHD, or they have they have some sort of ability. I love that you say a special ability, because it's really a derogatory term to say disability, right? But that is how they label it. Anyways, they're unique and they have unique needs. And I actually had a client come in. He was a hypnosis client, full-grown adult. I think he was like mid-30s, and he had gone through school his whole life, and meaning his parents contributed to this, his school system contributed to this. He felt he was wrong, and he felt that he was, and so of course in our session, this is the first time he's ever been seen. And I say, no, I've never met somebody with ADHD who is incredibly smart. It's all over the place. I can see it. I can tell you 5 different ways right now how you are this intelligent being. It's time to acknowledge that. It's really kind of, I don't know, it's difficult to kind of navigate both of those, the dynamic of the outside world and also what with your own family.
Well, and one of the things that I love with this, it's helping this conversation and kind of to dissipate a lot of this judgment and just energy around it with so many adults that unfortunately had just really, from uncomfortable, horrible to traumatic, like continually traumatizing experiences in their childhood that's gone into their young adulthood and adulthood, is actually seeing a lot more celebrities and innovators and creators out there that say, hey, I have ADHD. Hey, I have autism. Hey, I'm neurodivergent. And them seeing these positive examples that they can go to be like, well, if we have a similar thing going on, it's not exactly the same, but there is some synchronicities here. Wow, I wonder where else I could be using this difference to my advantage. And that's one of the things I work on with, because some of my parents will come to me with concerns for their child, and they're like, wow, I have to actually work on myself first. Can I work and do individual sessions first? And then we go back, and it has this beautiful cascade effect on their family, especially if they're like the manager leader person of their family. They really realize, I have to do some self-care. I have to check and see where I'm functioning with these limiting beliefs, like ignoring my gifts and capacities, or using my gifts and capacities against me instead of for me. Like a lot of these people, that's what I love about the book, Would You Teach a Fish to Climb a Tree? It's written by Dr. Dane Heer, Gary Douglas, and a social worker by the name of Anne Maxwell. And excuse me, I've been talking all day today, so sorry. And in there, they talk about how those who have these different labels and diagnoses are super, super, super aware of energy. And so they're actually functioning and perceiving energy faster than other people.
Yeah.
And so that's part of why some of them don't want to really talk, because they were like, I already sent you the picture to your head. How are you not getting this? Are you asking me to slow down, to use words when I already sent it to you? And so even them recognizing, the parents, how much they're picking up on their kids' messages without them talking, and then using that gift of them being able to perceive that and receive those messages to leverage it and actually help facilitate better communication is a wonderful gift. Or even them recognizing how much they're picking up on other people's stuff. It's like, okay, is that yours? Is that someone else's? Is that something you want to keep? Is that something you don't want to keep? Because some of those ideas are inspiration. And so it's like, you want to use that. It's like, I got this from this person's head. I got it from their body. Now, maybe I want to write a book about that. Or maybe I'm going to use this idea that I got from this book or movie or TV show. I'm going to cook a really yummy meal for me and my family. So it's not all blocking it out, the things that can come in, but being in the question with those things, I think, is one of those things that I really love empowering people to do, especially the young ones, because they do it really easily and really quickly.
Yeah. Pretty much with everything. And, when you mentioned earlier, how much are the children picking up on that the parents think are not happening. And I think that in my personal life, the biggest, most clearest explanation of that is, big things happen in people's life. Like my husband died, or, so their father died, or, my father died too. But guess what? My father was also an alcoholic. And I know I've lived with alcoholics, he and other people, right? And even as a child, I knew things that we never talked about, right? But it was something we all kind of dealt with. And so when you meet somebody else who has had a similar experience and they say something like, oh, well, my father was an alcoholic, immediately the things that they're dealing with, that you don't necessarily have to have the conversation, but I think it's naive of adults to think that children don't pick up on all that stuff. And I think adults pick up on it too. Maybe they haven't had experience talking about these kinds of things. So
they also shut it down because the world, the society, media, religion, other family members, like you name it, have told them that is not valuable. That is not okay to talk about. That is woo-woo. That is voodoo. That is whatever. All these things. And so they're like, I guess it's not okay. I have to slow myself down. I have to wait for evidence. I have to wait for proof. I have to wait for somebody else to sign off on it, for someone else's approval, all these different permissions. And so next thing you know, it's getting deeper and deeper and more shut down. When as a kid, we were like, bam, 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 bam. We got it so fast. And unfortunately, maybe there were repercussions to us being that fast. Or maybe we don't want to stand out and be really faster than everybody else because everyone else isn't willing to be that fast. But one of the things that I've learned in my own journey is that by me slowing myself down, I'm actually not being the leader that I could be and embracing my influence in my family and my loved ones. Because there's so many people that by me doing it first, it opened the door for them to be like, oh, I guess I could do it now. Like me, I came out as pansexual. I was one of the first people in my family before anyone really talked about pansexual. Like I knew that I first said bi, and then it was like, oh, this isn't really quite fit. And then it was pansexual when that terms came about. And then all of my cousins after me, because I'm the oldest grandchild, all my cousins after me were like, it was so amazing to see you do it. So when we were wondering about that for us, we were like, oh, well, our cousin Siris did this, and there are different types of identities that they've come out as, but like that was one example. And I didn't realize how much me slowing myself down in my youth and then in my early 20s and 30s, I was really keeping people captive. The very people I love and wanted to support, I was actually keeping them captive by waiting for other people to step up first, especially if you know that you're maybe a little bit braver, a little bit more in tune than others. It's probably you. It's probably you that needs to step up first and be the leader and be the example to them, because your kids are watching, your loved ones are watching, and you've got it. You can do it. And so as soon as I started really getting that, like, oh, shoot, I'm actually disempowering people by not stepping up instead of empowering them like I'm hoping to, it was like vroom, vroom, vroom from there, Blair. It was like, all right, I guess I got to do it.
So it's like permission to go to your heart space and follow your intuition. And then you actually wind up fulfilling your passion in life anyways, which I think, I mean, of course it's going to do it for you, but like you're saying, it's kind of laying the path work for everybody, which is actually the real truth behind why I have such hope for our world. Because I think a lot of times, we can, especially as adults, we can get bogged down by whatever's happening in the news and, whatever all that stuff is. But to think about how intelligent these young people are. And if we do it a little bit and they do, take it tenfold, to just go into that heart space and follow and do what they want to do. And one thing I was just thinking as you were talking is one of those things that I think causes people to hesitate is maybe they go to their heart space and they know that they want to say or do something, but then they think, oh, well, I don't think I should do that, or that's going to be really weird, right? But then when they get past that part, or, they're not going to accept me, or they're not going to like me or whatever, when they get past that and go ahead and do it, of course you run into that empowerment, but it's just like exponential growth. It's just so fast. It's like, it's energy. It's just a shift in energy that changes everything so quickly. So, I mean, I honestly really do have the biggest hope for where our world is going, because the youth is like this. Like,
yeah.
Is it a little ironic that all these people are getting diagnosed with ADHD? I don't believe that people didn't have ADHD when I was young, but whatever, they're labeling it. If it happens to come about because of prescriptions or whatever, it doesn't matter. We're at least to the point where we're actually coming at it from your kind of perspective, where it's like these young people are so incredibly intelligent, and they really are thinking faster than us. Can we keep up? Because they're the ones that are going to be the leaders, and we don't want them to be leaders when they've experienced so much trauma that they haven't dealt with because we didn't deal with our own, right?
Yeah. The whole hurt people. So if they are the trauma, it's not that all people who are traumatized are going to hurt people, but it makes it a lot harder for them to navigate the world. And they have those boulders on their back. And I'd love to alleviate that and clear that off for sure. Now, I'm curious for you too, like with your work, and have you worked with children and families, and how are you seeing some of the obstacles with supporting them in feeling empowered to know what they know?
I don't work with I do work I work more with individuals now, but when I was a teacher, of course, you're absolutely with children and of course you're teaching them, right? You're getting to know them, but then you're dealing with the families. But I would say just for me as a person, probably my whole life has really kind of been about this kind of thing. Like it finally just clicked with me. It's not that it hasn't come through before, but it just clicked with me again. The reason people like to come and work with me is because I do look at the person as whole and complete as they are, right? And like, there's no two bones about it. Like, there's no wishy-washy. It's like, oh, you have this behavior. That might be a problem for other people. Like, let's see if we can help you to get along better with other people, right? But that doesn't mean that you yourself, there's anything necessarily wrong with you. So, I mean, I do see when I work with individuals, they tell me about their families, and it's a dynamic. It's just like you're talking about with parents and children, even adults with stepchildren, even if they're grown, we see the people that I work with are working on themselves, right? So they're doing the same kind of work, except they're doing it on themselves. And I'm one of those too, right? I do this work on myself, but I have normal, like average kids. I'm married to a man who doesn't know anything about any of this stuff. He thinks it's, oh, okay, whatever. But I do the work.
He's like, do you, boo-boo? Mm-hmm.
Yes. But I do the work, and then they wind up shifting. And what I find with my own children, which is really interesting, is that, we can play the game of this is how the world works or whatever. But when it comes down to it, when something's really emotional or really hard for them, they open up and they say, okay, well, what do you think about this, Mom? And then I'll tell them the truth, like, well, here's the situation. This person is kind of uncomfortable about how you display affection, and you're not uncomfortable. And that's okay that they're uncomfortable with it, but that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you because of that, right? And so how does that play out in your life and your decisions and what you pick, and how do you choose to speak to people and that kind of thing? So I do see the dynamic with other people, but I usually do more one-on-one. And so I hear it from one person's perspective, Yeah. Whereas when I was in the education system, you're one-on-one with the child, and then you're talking with the parents. So you might hear like little bits, teachers got 150 or more students a day, right? And that's a lot. Like, you can't be on one-on-one with every single person. But yeah, and of course in the classroom too, you have dynamic of others.
Were you teaching?
I taught mostly middle school. I taught a little bit of high school. Yeah.
Yeah, because the elementary school teachers they don't have 150, but then they have other considerations, right?
Oh, yeah.
And high school is different too. That's really interesting. One of the things that really stood out for what you were saying was this idea of really listening to what you really would like and not living based on other people's expectations. So like, I love what you did with, it was your daughter that you're mentioning about how she shows affection differently than
it's actually my son, which is funny because of course we have certain expectations societally, right? With the way that people are, but he's got, this shows up in astrology. He's got a really solid Venus. Like he is comfortable in the way he shows affection. And so, he's old enough now that he's had a girlfriend, but that was one of the things, is that he was comfortable showing affection, but she was not. And it wasn't
physical affection or verbal affection.
I think it was everything. It was like, He was just really comfortable in how he did that. And she wasn't. And it was very obvious that you see that, but that's one of his lessons to learn. Okay, well, I need to learn boundaries. I need to learn to be able to read somebody else and figure out what's okay. But it wasn't. Also,
is that going to work for me to be with someone that does?
Oh, yeah.
That is judgmental of mine. Like, it's one thing if they just don't really like it or they don't get it, but it's like they judge how I show up in the world. That's a very different conversation.
Right. And that definitely was essentially the biggest lesson for him, which he's not dating that person anymore. But that's essentially what it really was.
Yeah. That's one of those things that all of us navigate over and over again with work, with relationships, with friendships. It's like, okay, where do I meet somebody in the middle or modulate? And where does it just not going to work? And we have to part ways.
Yep.
Over and over again. And that's, that touches upon one of the things that I address with my coaching as well, is that's one of the limiting beliefs that some people have, is like, okay, have you been functioning where you're living based on what everyone else expects of you, and you're not really living what's going to work for you. Like what's going to work for you now and in the future in like a really sustainable, joyful, nurturing way. A lot of us, it's like, oh, it's all about being of service to everyone else. And so then you don't include yourself, your body, those needs in to the equation. And next thing you know, you wake up and you're like, how did I get here? Oh, because piece by piece by piece, you've been chopping off bits of yourself, giving it away to everyone else. And then there's nothing left of you in your life. And that's what happens with a lot of my parents, especially parents that have kiddos with special abilities. I actually have quite a number of parents that work with me that have more than one child that have special abilities and completely different profiles. Mm-hmm. And so between all the appointments, all the surgeries, all the follow-ups, and they're like going, and they're not getting sleep. They're not nurturing their partnership if they have a partner. They don't have time with friends or decompression time. And then next thing you know, they're like, is this what I signed up for? Like, is this what my life is going to be for the next who knows how long? And it gets them really sad and really depressed. And I get it. If we don't include a sense of joy and we don't include ourselves in it, it would be really sad. Yeah. Because where are we? Where are we in our lives?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times people feel like when they're in a situation like that, that there is no outlet. There is no place. They don't have help they can find it. But ultimately, when you get in that position, you feel like there's no way to get out of it. It's that stuck feeling again. But there is a way to get out of it. And it starts with taking care of yourself.
And also, I love working through like systems and routines. Mm-hmm. So, like I look at the family's routines. I look at the systems they already have in place, from like organizational systems to communication systems, and seeing if it's 15 minutes here, if it's 30 minutes there, wherever they can find it. And then what are the activities that they can do in those 15, 30 minutes where they're nurturing themselves, where they are having those little bright spots that is like, oh, here I am. Yeah. Oh, here's what brings me joy. Oh, this is who I thought I wanted to be. And I actually am becoming that person more and more. And it doesn't have to be put to the side on the shelf until my kids turn 18 or 25 or 35, whenever that is. It can happen now. And what's interesting is even my most overwhelmed, burnt out of parents, as soon as they start finding those 15, 30-minute increments that we find very creatively in their schedule, they are like, no way. At first they're like, no way, it's not possible. I was like, trust me, I've not met a parent or family yet that I haven't been able to find those nuggets. It starts to create this little wedge where they start to peek and open it a little bit more and more. And they're like, oh, I actually can be really creative in how I use my time, and I create these systems, and I am willing to receive help from other people more. I'm willing to ask and advocate and not make myself wrong and not isolate myself so much anymore. And the next thing you know, they have a full hour. What? Oh my God, they have a little bit more time here. Maybe they can go for a walk. They could take a bath. These different things that are so small, but they're so powerful, but they could do. That gives them more breathing room. And man, don't we all need some more breathing room? My goodness gracious, with what's going on in the world right now, every breath.
Yes.
Let's have more of that.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I want to make sure that they know how to reconnect with you. Anything you want to tell them about how to connect with you and where they can go from there?
Yeah. Well, if people go to my website, empoweringlightlanguage.com, if you go to the library, like /library, there's a bunch of free, like 9-page, 10-page little PDFs that you can play around with. One is being a different possibility for children that provides 5 tools. So kids can be more successful, happier, more connected to their gifts. There's also one that might be beneficial to your listeners that is 5 questions to ask to stop self-sabotage in your relationships. That's like another 9-pager. And so these really clear questions, simple, that when you sit with them, you can see if any of those are running in your life, these limiting beliefs that we were talking about, and then some ways that you can pivot away from that so you can have more of you, exuberantly lit up more of you.
Yeah, awesome. It kind of feels like you're helping people to remember who they really are.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And it feels good. And that is absolutely expansive. So once they get to that place, then just things go better, more aligned.
And I'm on most platforms too. If anybody wants to find me on YouTube, on Instagram, it's all Empowering Light Language on Facebook. I try to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah.
And I love getting emails. And just make sure if you email me, please add me to your contacts. So when I reply, you actually get it and it doesn't go to your spam or your hidden junk mail folder.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Blair. I really appreciate it.
Send inquiries, suggestions for new discussion topics, and comments to podcast@happylioncenter.com. That's podcast@happylioncenter.com. If you found this content enjoyable or helpful, please comment, like, share, and download. Donations are appreciated and help us to produce more of similar content. Consider making a contribution at the links in the description box. Your support is greatly appreciated. The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Happy Lion Center and are not intended to malign any religion, ethnic group, club, organization, company, individual, or anyone or anything. None of the content provided should be considered a substitute for legal, financial, medical, psychiatric advice or as care from a certified professional.